Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a tiny vibration that I almost ignored. I was deep into a late-night movie, the kind with too many plot holes and just enough explosions to keep me entertained. She was in the shower, belting out an off-key rendition of some pop song. It was background noise. All of it was. Then the phone buzzed again. And again. I glanced over it. The screen lit up with a preview. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My brain struggled to process the words. My hand moved on its own, grabbing the phone before the screen dimmed. I unlocked it with a passcode I'd memorized months ago. Back then, I didn't think twice about knowing her code. We were married. Trust was a given. The message thread was right there, staring me in the face. The sender's name wasn't saved, just a number. But the conversation left no room for doubt. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. Her. Me too. Same time tomorrow. You're dangerous. Her. You love it. The words blurred as rage and nausea roared through me. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a joke. This was real. My wife, my partner, my best friend had written those messages. And I wasn't the man she was texting. The sound of water running in the bathroom felt 1,000 miles away. My mind raced. Do I confront her now? Do I wait? Do I even want to hear her excuses? The phone buzzed again. A new message. I still can't believe how flexible you are. My stomach turned, and I didn't even think. I tapped out a reply. Me. She'll be free forever. I hit send. It was impulsive, but the words felt perfect. This wasn't a plea or a threat. It was a declaration. She'd made her choice last night, and I was making mine now. I dropped the phone back on the nightstand and stood up, my body moving on autopilot. I had maybe 5 minutes before she finished her shower. 5 minutes to decide what came next. And I knew exactly what to do. As I stood in the dim bedroom, her phone still glowing faintly on the nightstand, the weight of the betrayal pressed down on me like a vice. My fingers felt numb, my pulse loud and erratic. I'd always thought trust was something solid, like a foundation you could build a life on. But now, it felt as fragile as glass, shattering with a single careless blow. The memory of her laugh drifted into my mind, the way she smiled at me this morning, casually, as if nothing was wrong. How many times had she looked me in the eye, kissed me goodbye, and then turn around to see him? I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch a hole in the wall or throw her phone across the room. But none of that would change what had already happened. None of it would erase the texts I'd just read, the nauseating proof of what she'd done. What drove her to this? Was I not enough? Was she bored? I thought back to our conversations over the past few months, trying to pinpoint where the cracks had started to form. There had been no signs, at least none I recognized at the time. She still kissed me goodnight, still asked about my day, still curled up next to me on the couch, her head on my shoulder, while we watched TV. Was it all a lie? Or worse, was I just a placeholder, a convenient standby, until she found whatever thrill she was chasing? The shower turned off, the sound of the water replaced by the squeak of the faucet. I had maybe 2 minutes now, if that. I needed to act, but all I could do was stare at her suitcase in the corner of the closet. It was the one we always used for trips, the one I'd packed 1,000 times for romantic weekends and family holidays. Now, it was about to carry her out of my life. I crossed the room and yanked it out of the closet. The sound of the wheels scraping against the hardwood felt deafening in the silence. I started throwing her clothes inside, shirts, jeans, underwear. I didn't care if they were neatly folded or if I was missing something. This wasn't about being fair. This was about making it clear she was done here. As I stuffed her belongings into the suitcase, I thought about temptation. The way it lures people in with the promise of excitement, a taste of something forbidden. I wondered if it started small for her. An innocent conversation, a lingering glance, a harmless flirtation that spiraled into something neither of them could stop. Or maybe she hadn't resisted at all. Maybe she'd jumped headfirst into it, never thinking about the damage she'd leave behind. That's what hurt the most. Not just the betrayal, but the ease with which she'd done it. Like I didn't matter. Like we didn't matter. The bathroom door opened, and she stepped into the bedroom wrapped in a towel, her hair damp and messy. She was humming softly, a carefree sound that made my blood boil. Then her eyes landed on the suitcase by the door, and her humming stopped. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tinged with confusion and a flicker of unease. I didn't say anything. I picked up her phone from the nightstand and held it out to her. Her expression changed instantly. Panic, guilt, fear. It was all there, flashing across her face like a neon sign. "Is this a joke?" she asked, forcing a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "I know," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. She took a step back, her grip tightening on the towel. "Let me explain." "No," I interrupted. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to lie to my face anymore. You done here?" Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked utterly powerless. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need to hear her excuses. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. She stared at the phone in my hand, her eyes wide and glistening with fear, like a child caught red-handed. I waited for her to say something, anything, that could explain away what I'd seen. But nothing came, and the longer the silence dragged on, the more I realized she didn't have an explanation, not one that would matter. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she finally whispered. Her voice was small, barely audible, but those words were enough to ignite something sharp and bitter inside me. "You didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated, my voice cracking like a whip. "What part didn't you mean? The sneaking around? The lies? Or maybe just the part where I found out?" Her face crumpled, and for a fleeting second, I thought she might start crying. But I wasn't going to fall for it. Not now. Not after everything. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her towel slipping slightly, but she didn't seem to notice. "I was lonely," she said softly, like she was confessing to herself more than to me. "I don't even know how it started. It was stupid. I was stupid. Lonely." The word echoed in my mind, hollow and cruel. I couldn't stop myself from laughing, though it sounded more like a bark. "Lonely? You were lonely." I shook my head, pacing the room like a caged animal. "Do you know how many nights I sat across from you at dinner, trying to make conversation while you scrolled on your phone? How many weekends I planned dates, only for you to cancel because you were too tired? And now you want to tell me you were lonely?" She flinched, her hands clutching the towel tighter. "It wasn't about you," she said quickly. "It wasn't about us." "Oh, of course not." I stopped pacing and turned to face her, my chest heaving. "It's never about the people you betray, is it? It's about your feelings, your needs, your boredom. God forbid you actually talk to me about it. No, better to just find someone else to fill the void." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might fight back. But then her shoulders slumped, and she looked away. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said quietly. "Congratulations," I said bitterly. "You failed spectacularly." I sank into the chair by the window, my head in my hands. The room felt too small, the walls pressing in on me. I wanted to escape, to run away from the suffocating weight of her betrayal, but my body wouldn't move. Images flashed in my mind. The first time we met, the way her laugh had been like a spark that lit up the entire room. Our wedding day, when she looked at me like I was the only man in the world. The quiet morning spent in bed, her head on my chest as the sunlight filtered through the curtains. Had all of it been a lie? Or had those moments been real, only to be undone by her selfishness? I looked up at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman I'd fallen in love with. I saw a stranger, someone I couldn't recognize. And the worst part was knowing she had been a stranger for longer than I realized. "Why him?" I asked, my voice raw. She blinked, startled. "What? Why him?" I repeated. "Out of all the people in the world, why did you choose him?" Her lips parted, but no answer came. Maybe she didn't know, or maybe she just didn't want to admit it. Either way, it didn't matter. The damage was done. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, her voice breaking. "Me too," I said, standing up. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the air between us heavy with things left unsaid. Then I walked to the door, picked up the suitcase, and set it on the porch. When I turned back to her, the expression on her face was one I'd never forget, a mixture of regret, fear, and something that almost looked like relief. You're free now, I said, my voice flat. Go live your life. Just don't expect me to be a part of it. I closed the door before she could respond, the sound echoing like the final nail in a coffin. The silence in the house was unbearable. It wasn't just the absence of her voice or the rhythmic sound of her footsteps. It was something deeper, a hollow, yawning emptiness that wrapped itself around me like a cold blanket. I stood in the living room, staring at the front door, half expecting her to knock, to plead for another chance. But the street outside was quiet, the only movement coming from the branches of the oak tree swaying in the wind. She was gone. The relief I thought I'd feel wasn't there. Instead, a storm of emotions raged inside me. Anger, sadness, betrayal, confusion. They churned and twisted, crashing into one another like waves during a hurricane. Why wasn't I enough? The question burned in my mind, though I hated myself for asking it. I knew, deep down, that this wasn't about me. It was about her, her choices, her weakness. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. It didn't stop the voice in my head from whispering every insecurity I'd ever buried. I walked over to the couch and collapsed onto it, letting my head fall back against the cushions. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't take a full breath. We'd built this life together, this home, this marriage, this future I thought we both wanted. Every piece of furniture in this house was a memory. The dining table where we'd laughed over dinner, her face lit up with joy as she told me about her day. The bookshelf we'd assembled together, bickering over which shelf should hold her romance novels and which should hold my history books. The couch we were supposed to grow old on, sitting side by side, reminiscing about the life we'd built. Now it all felt tainted. I grabbed a throw pillow and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thud, sliding to the floor. It wasn't satisfying. Nothing would be. Why him? I'd asked her that question earlier, but I hadn't needed an answer. The truth was it didn't matter who he was. It could have been anyone, someone to flatter her, to make her feel wanted, to distract her from whatever emptiness she carried inside. Still, I couldn't help but picture him. Was he taller than me? Funnier? More charming? Did he make her feel something I couldn't? The jealousy was like poison, eating away at me from the inside. I hated him, this faceless man who had stolen something sacred. But I hated her more for giving it to him. The phone buzzed on the coffee table, snapping me out of my thoughts. Not hers, mine. I picked it up, half dreading what I'd see. A text from her sister. What's going on? She says you kicked her out. Call me. I stared at the screen, my grip tightening around the phone. I could already hear the conversation in my head. Her sister defending her, telling me to forgive, to move past it, to save our marriage because that's what people are supposed to do. But what did saving it even mean? Letting her stay? Pretending this hadn't happened? Spending every day wondering if she'd do it again? No, that wasn't a marriage. That was a prison. I tossed the phone onto the couch and stood, pacing the room like a restless ghost. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, but one thing was clear. The person I thought I knew didn't exist anymore. The woman I loved, the woman I promised to grow old with, had been replaced by a stranger. Someone capable of looking me in the eye, saying I love you, and then sneaking off to someone else's bed. I stopped pacing and looked at the front door again. It felt like a line had been drawn in the sand tonight. On one side was everything I'd hoped for, everything I thought we could be. On the other side was reality. The reality where trust was broken, where love wasn't enough. And now, there was no going back. I found myself in the bathroom, staring into the mirror, though I didn't remember walking there. My reflection stared back at me, hollow-eyed and disheveled. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the sink until my knuckles turned white. Who was I now? That's the question that haunted me. The betrayal had carved something out of me, leaving behind a man I didn't recognize. I was a husband yesterday, proud and secure in the life I thought I'd built. Now, I didn't even know where to begin piecing myself together. The thought hit me like a sucker punch. She didn't just betray me. She broke me. I splashed cold water on my face, hoping it might snap me out of the fog. But as the droplets slid down my skin, I felt another wave of emotions rising. Anger, raw and primal, like a wildfire spreading through dry brush. She didn't just betray me. She took something sacred and cheapened it. Trust, intimacy, love. All the things we'd built together now felt like lies. I slammed my fist onto the countertop, the sound reverberating through the small bathroom. It hurt, but the pain was a welcome distraction from the ache in my chest. My eyes drifted back to the mirror. I didn't like what I saw. There was a vulnerability in my expression that made me feel weak, pathetic. I hated the thought of her seeing me like this, like I'd been gutted and left for dead. But the truth was I had been. What does he have that I don't? The question snaked through my mind, unbidden and unwelcome. I could feel its weight settling in my chest, the insecurities clawing their way to the surface. Was I not attractive enough? Not exciting enough? Did I work too much? Talk too little? I tried to shake the thoughts away, but they clung to me like a second skin. The fact that she had chosen someone else, it wasn't just betrayal. It was rejection, a loud, clear statement that I wasn't enough. And yet, another part of me, a quieter voice buried beneath the anger and pain, whispered a different truth. This wasn't about you. I wanted to reject it, to hold on to my anger because it felt safer. But as I stood there, staring into my own eyes, I couldn't escape the fact that her actions said more about her than they did about me. She was the one who lied, the one who gave into temptation, the one who couldn't face whatever demons were inside her, and instead ran into someone else's arms. And yet I still felt the sting of failure, like I should have done something, anything, to stop this from happening. I thought back to the moments over the past few months when things felt off. The time she pulled her phone closer when I walked by. The nights she stayed out later than usual. The little white lies that I brushed aside because I didn't want to seem controlling. Did I ignore the signs? The thought was unbearable, but it lingered. I had trusted her completely, never questioning her loyalty, because I didn't want to be that guy, the suspicious, jealous husband who suffocated his wife with insecurity. But maybe, just maybe, I should have asked harder questions. I reached for the towel on the rack and dried my face, my movements slow and deliberate. The weight of it all pressed down on me, but for the first time that night, there was a glimmer of clarity. She had failed me, yes, but I had failed myself too, by trusting blindly, by ignoring my instincts, by giving so much of myself to someone who hadn't earned it. As I left the bathroom, my jaw tightened. The grief was still there, as was the anger, but beneath it all, a new resolve was forming. This wasn't just about her betrayal anymore. It was about what I'd do next. The house felt impossibly quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful but oppressive, where every creak of the floor or hum of the fridge sounded deafening. It was like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what I'd do next. I wandered into the kitchen, not because I was hungry, but because I needed to move, to do something. My mind wouldn't stop racing, replaying the night over and over like a scratch record. Her face when she saw the suitcase. The way her voice cracked when she said, "I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean to hurt you." I slammed the cabinet door shut, harder than I intended. What a ridiculous thing to say. Of course, she didn't mean to hurt me. That wasn't the point. The point was that she didn't care enough to not hurt me. That she'd taken the risk anyway, knowing full well what was at stake. And now, here I was, left to sift through the ashes of our life together. I opened the fridge, then closed it again. I wasn't looking for food. I was looking for a distraction, anything to keep the memories at bay. But they came anyway, creeping in like shadows I couldn't escape. The first time we met, she had this laugh that caught me off guard, loud and unrestrained, like she didn't care who was watching. It was what drew me to her, that sense of freedom and joy. I remember thinking this is someone I could build a life with, someone who wouldn't let me down. What a cruel joke that turned out to be. I sat at the kitchen table, running my hands through my hair, my eyes landing on the stack of mail she'd left there earlier this week. Her handwriting was on one of the envelopes, a grocery list she'd jotted down on the back. Milk, eggs, bread. As if we were still a team, I picked up the envelope and stared at it, my thumb tracing the curve of her handwriting. It struck me how ordinary it all seemed. The betrayal wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't some fiery explosion that tore us apart. It was quiet, insidious, slipping in through the cracks until the foundation of our marriage crumbled. I thought about the man from her texts, the faceless stranger who had stepped into my life without even knowing my name. Did he feel guilt? Did he feel any responsibility for what he'd done? Or was I just collateral damage in their little fantasy? I hated him, but I hated her more, because she was the one who looked me in the eye every day and still chose to lie. She was the one who made promises and broke them. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. My chest felt tight again, the grief and anger building until I thought I might explode. I grabbed the grocery list, crumpling it in my hand. This house was a museum of our life together. Every corner held a memory, a ghost of what we used to be. The framed photo on the mantel of us at the beach, her hair wild from the wind. The throw blanket on the couch that she always wrapped herself in when she was cold. The little trinkets she'd collected over the years, now scattered on shelves like remnants of a battle. I couldn't live like this. I grabbed the photo off the mantel and stared at it for a long moment. We looked happy, her head on my shoulder, both of us grinning at the camera. But looking at it now, all I could feel was the weight of what was lost. Without thinking, I hurled it across the room. The glass shattered, scattering across the floor like broken promises. It wasn't enough. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, heading to the closet where the garbage bags were stored. If this house was going to haunt me, I'd burn every ghost to the ground. The garbage bags lined the floor like a grim assembly line, each one filled with pieces of a life that no longer existed. I started with her clothes. It was easier to focus on things, tangible objects, than the emotions swirling in my chest. One by one, I pulled dresses, sweaters, and jeans off their hangers and shoved them into the bags without looking too closely. Her favorite scarf went in, the blouse she wore on our last anniversary, the hoodie she stole from me and wore around the house. Every item felt like a memory, a thread in the fabric of our story. But tonight, I was cutting all the threads loose. As I worked, I felt a strange mixture of numbness and fury. It wasn't just the betrayal that burned. It was the sheer audacity of it. How could she do this and still walk around the house like nothing had happened? How could she smile at me, touch me, share meals with me, knowing the truth? Was she tempted? Of course. Everyone is. Temptation doesn't discriminate. But temptation isn't an excuse. It's a test. And she failed. The next bag was for the things that screamed her presence in the house. The throw blanket she always wrapped herself in on movie nights. The candles she lit when she wanted to set the mood. The stack of romance novels that had taken over half the bookshelf. I thought I'd feel better, but as the bags filled, the house felt emptier. Not just physically, but emotionally. Each object I threw away wasn't just a thing. It was a moment, a reminder of the life we'd built together. The life she destroyed. I took a break and sat on the couch, staring at the pile of bags by the door. My chest ached, not from the physical effort, but from the weight of what I was doing. I had to remind myself that this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about anger. It was about reclaiming my space, my life. But reclaiming it from what? Or from who? I kept picturing her face. Not just the guilty, panicked expression she wore earlier, but the way she used to look at me. Like I was her whole world. Was it real? Any of it? Or had she been pretending all along? The thought made me nauseous. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to shake the memories. But they came anyway. The time we danced in the living room, barefoot and laughing, to a song we couldn't even remember the name of. The way she hugged me when I got promoted at work, her pride shining brighter than my own. And then, uninvited, the darker memories pushed through. The way she'd been distant lately, always distracted, her smile just a little too forced. The night she'd said she was working late, but came home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. How many lies had I missed? How many red flags had I ignored because I didn't want to believe them? I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. The anger was back, sharp and relentless, but beneath it was something worse. Grief. Not just for the woman I'd lost, but for the man I used to be, the one who believed in her, in us. I grabbed the last photo of us from the mantel, the one I hadn't destroyed yet. It was from a hiking trip, both of us grinning at the top of a cliff, the sun setting behind us. Her arms were wrapped around my waist, her face pressed against my shoulder. I stared at it for a long moment, my thumb brushing over her face. Then I dropped it into the last bag. The sound of glass hitting plastic was final, like a door slamming shut. I tied the bags and dragged them to the garage, one by one, until the house felt emptier than ever. As I closed the door and leaned against it, the exhaustion hit me. I didn't just feel tired, I felt drained, like every ounce of energy had been sucked out of me. But as I stood there, catching my breath, I realized something else. For the first time that night, the air felt a little lighter. The house was quiet now, stripped of her presence. The garbage bags waited in the garage like corpses of a past life, out of sight, but far from out of mind. I sat on the couch, the emptiness pressing in from all sides. It felt different tonight. Not the kind of quiet you get after a long day, where you can sink into the calm and let it soothe you. No, this was the silence of something broken. I stared at the blank TV screen, my own reflection looking back at me. My face was a mask of exhaustion and anger, but behind that, there was something worse. Sadness. It crept in slowly, insidiously, until it wrapped itself around me like a chain I couldn't break. When did we stop being us? The question hovered in the air, heavy and cruel. I had no answer. Maybe it was gradual, like the tide eroding the shore bit by bit, until one day the ground beneath us wasn't stable anymore. Or maybe it was sudden, a single moment when she decided I wasn't enough, though I never got the memo. I tried to remember the last time I felt truly happy with her. It wasn't as easy as it should have been. The memories that came were blurry, like trying to recall a dream after waking up. Had we been drifting apart for longer than I realized? And if so, why didn't I see it? Why didn't she say anything? I rubbed my hands over my face, the anger bubbling up again. Communication. That's what people always said was the key to a healthy marriage. Talk it out. Be honest. But she didn't talk to me. She didn't tell me she was unhappy, or bored, or tempted. She didn't give me a chance to fix it. Instead, she chose the easy way out. Someone new, someone exciting. Someone who wasn't me. I stood up, the restless energy surging through me again. I walked to the window and looked out into the darkness. The street was quiet, the houses dark. Somewhere out there, she was probably staying with a friend or in a hotel, spinning her version of the story. Does she even feel guilty? The thought made my stomach churn. Did she lie awake, consumed by regret? Or was she relieved, happy to finally be free of the life we'd built together? I clenched my fists. There was no way to know, and that was the worst part, the not knowing. The questions that circled in my head like vultures, picking at the remains of my self-worth. I thought back to the text I'd read earlier, the casual way she'd talked to him, the way she'd laughed about things they'd done together, as if I didn't exist, as if my love, my trust, meant nothing. The pain was sharp, cutting through me like a blade. I turned away from the window and sank back onto the couch. My mind was a war zone, torn between anger and grief, betrayal and longing. How do you move on from something like this? How do you take a love you thought was forever and bury it in a single night? The answer didn't come. It wouldn't come. Not tonight, not tomorrow. All I knew was that this wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of the man I used to be, the one who trusted too easily, who believed too much in the promises people made. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with the weight of the truth. I didn't deserve this, but I also couldn't change it. The only thing left to do was survive it. The next morning came slowly, dragging its feet like it knew I wasn't ready to face it. The light streaming through the windows felt harsh, invasive, as if the day itself was mocking me. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, though I wasn't drinking it. The warmth of the mug in my hands was the only thing anchoring me. The bags in the garage still weighed on my mind, but it wasn't just about her clothes or the memories I'd stuffed inside. It was about the questions I couldn't answer, the parts of me I wasn't sure how to rebuild. I stared at my phone on the table. A few notifications blinked on the screen, texts from her sister, missed calls from friends who'd probably heard something by now. I didn't touch it. I couldn't deal with the explanations, the condolences, the "are you okay?" questions. Because no, I wasn't okay. I couldn't stop thinking about the moments that led up to this. The way her laugh used to fill this house. The quiet evenings when we'd sit together, saying nothing but still feeling close. The mornings when she'd kiss my cheek before rushing out the door. But now those memories felt tainted, hollow. Were they real? That question echoed louder than any other. Were those moments genuine? Or had they always been an illusion? Was she lying to me then, too, even before the affair? Or had something inside her changed, slowly and silently, until she became someone I couldn't recognize? I ran my hand through my hair, frustration bubbling beneath my skin. I hated how much space she still occupied in my mind, even after everything she'd done. She doesn't deserve this power over you, I told myself. But logic and emotions don't always play nice together. I got up and started pacing, the kitchen feeling too small, too suffocating. My eyes landed on the wall where our wedding photo had hung. It wasn't there anymore. I'd taken it down last night, along with the other framed pictures that told the story of a life that didn't exist anymore. The bare spot on the wall felt like a wound, raw and exposed. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside, the crisp morning air biting at my skin. I walked aimlessly, letting my feet guide me while my mind churned through the mess of emotions I couldn't sort out. As I moved through the quiet neighborhood, I thought about temptation, the thing everyone warns you about but never fully prepares you for. It's like a whisper in the back of your mind, promising something thrilling, something new, but it doesn't tell you about the cost. She had given in to that whisper, and now I was the one paying the price. I stopped at a park bench and sat down, my breath visible in the cold air. Across from me, a couple walked hand in hand, laughing about something I couldn't hear. They looked so effortless, so happy. I envied them. Not because I wanted her back, I didn't, but because they still had something I'd lost. Trust. Connection. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, and stared at the ground. For so long, I'd believed that love was enough to hold everything together. That no matter how hard things got, as long as we loved each other, we'd make it through. But love isn't a fortress. It's a bridge, and bridges can collapse if they're not cared for. I exhaled, my breath shaky. I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't go back and fix the cracks in our foundation or stop her from making the choices she made. But maybe, just maybe, I could start rebuilding. Not with her, never with her, but with myself. The thought wasn't a solution, and it didn't erase the pain. But it was a beginning, a small, fragile beginning. And for now, that was enough. The days blurred together after that night. Mornings were filled with silence. Afternoons stretched long and heavy, and evenings brought the weight of solitude crashing down on me. It wasn't the absence of her presence that hurt the most. It was the absence of the life we'd built, or the illusion of it anyway. Everywhere I turned, there were reminders. The chipped coffee mug she loved, the faint smell of her perfume lingering on the closet door, the way the pillows on the couch still bore the shape of her habits. It was like trying to move on while being haunted. But something shifted as the weeks passed. The anger, once sharp and consuming, dulled into something quieter. The sadness, once overwhelming, softened into a bittersweet ache. The memories still came, but they no longer cut me open the way they used to. I started to see myself in a different light, not as the victim of her choices, but as someone who had the power to make choices of his own. One evening, I sat on the back porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The sky was a riot of colors, fiery oranges and soft purples bleeding into one another. It was beautiful in a way I hadn't noticed in a long time. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, dragging my attention away. It was her. She'd been trying to reach me on and off for days, each text more desperate than the last. At first, I ignored her. Then I read them, letting her words wash over me without response. I made a mistake. Please, just let me explain. We can fix this. Tonight's message was different, though. I miss you. For a long time, I stared at the screen. I could almost hear her voice, The way she used to say those words on nights when she'd been out late, when she'd crawl into bed and press herself against me as if I were her safe harbor. But this time, the words felt hollow. They weren't a promise. They were a plea, a desperate attempt to reclaim something she'd already thrown away. I set the phone down and looked back at the horizon. The last sliver of sunlight disappeared, leaving the world bathed in twilight. I thought about temptation and betrayal, about trust and the fragile bonds we build with the people we love. She had been tempted, and she had fallen. But what hurt most wasn't the act itself. It was the choice. The choice to betray, to lie, to take the easy road without ever considering the wreckage she'd leave behind. And now it was my turn to choose. I picked up the phone and opened her message. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, the words forming in my mind before I could stop them. I miss who I thought you were. I hit send. It wasn't vengeful or cruel. It was the truth, plain and simple. She had been someone else to me once, a partner, a confidant, my best friend. But that person no longer existed, and I couldn't pretend otherwise. The phone buzzed again almost immediately, but I didn't check it. I turned it off and set it aside, leaning back in my chair as the first stars began to dot the night sky. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. This wasn't the ending I'd imagined for us, but it was an ending nonetheless. And with every ending comes the chance for a new beginning. I didn't know what that beginning would look like yet, but I was ready to find out.